The story of the Harlem Renaissance begins long before the first jazz notes drifted through smoky clubs or the first lines of poetry appeared in print. Its roots lie in the aftermath of the Civil War and the deep scars left by the failed promises of Reconstruction. In the South, African Americans were hemmed in by harsh Jim Crow laws, trapped in cycles of economic exploitation like sharecropping, and threatened by the constant shadow of racial violence. This oppressive environment, though devastating, also sparked a yearning for freedom and self-determination, a flame that would ultimately light the way north. As the 20th century dawned, new opportunities began to beckon from distant cities. The outbreak of World War I brought profound changes to the American labor market. With immigration from Europe slow to a trickle and factories desperate for workers, northern industrialists turned their attention south. Recruiters promised black workers wages several times higher than what they could earn in southern fields, and news of these prospects spread quickly, thanks in large part to black newspapers like the Chicago Defender. These papers published stories of success and job advertisements, forging a powerful link between the dreamers of the South and the factories of the North. So began the Great Migration, a movement of people so vast it would reshape the American landscape. Starting around 1916, more than 6 million African Americans left the rural South over the coming decades, seeking not only economic opportunity but also an escape from the relentless oppression that had defined their lives. By 1920, approximately 1.5 million had already moved north, and the pace only quickened in the years that followed. As trains rolled into cities like Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, and above all New York, black populations swelled. In just 10 years, from 1910 to 1920, New York's black population grew by an astonishing 66%, while cities like Detroit saw increases of more than 600%. This great demographic shift laid the groundwork for something extraordinary. Harlem, a neighborhood in Upper Manhattan, became the destination for many of these new arrivals. Originally built for a white upper class, Harlem had experienced overbuilding and, following an exodus of white residents, what historians sometimes call white flight, landlords began renting to black tenants. The effect was dramatic. In 1910, Harlem's black population was around 10,000. By 1920, it had grown to nearly 73,000, and by 1930, that number had soared above 200,000, making it the largest concentration of black people anywhere in the world at that time. But Harlem was more than just a crowded neighborhood. It was a crossroads, a meeting place for unskilled laborers seeking work, for the newly emerging black middle class, and for people from many backgrounds who shared the collective memory of slavery, emancipation, and the struggle against racial oppression. Here, the desire for self-expression and self-determination took root and flourished. The social and economic pressures that brought people to Harlem also brought their dreams, their talents, and their stories. In this vibrant, sometimes chaotic environment, the Harlem Renaissance began to take shape. The movement is often dated from the end of World War I through the mid-1930s, with its heart beating strongest in the 1920s. It was known at the time as the New Negro Movement, a term popularized by Alan Locke, whose 1925 anthology, The New Negro, became a kind of manifesto for this new era. Locke, a philosopher and writer, is widely regarded as the movement's intellectual architect, and his work helped crystallize the sense of possibility and pride that was spreading through Harlem. The Harlem Renaissance was never just about art for art's sake. It was a broad, dynamic cultural awakening, one that encompassed literature, music, visual arts, theater, and dance. At its core was a new sense of racial pride and the determination to portray black life in America with honesty and dignity. The movement brought together poets and novelists like Langston Hughes, who arrived in Harlem in 1921 and pioneered the form of jazz poetry, Zora Neale Hurston, a writer and anthropologist who brought the rhythms of black folklore and speech to the page, and James Weldon Johnson, whose activism and writing helped shape the movement's direction. Musicians such as Duke Ellington, Bessie Smith, and Louis Armstrong filled Harlem's clubs with the sounds of jazz and blues, while visual artists like Aaron Douglas captured the spirit of the age in paint and ink. This explosion of creativity was rooted in a shared experience but was anything but uniform. Harlem attracted people from across the United States and, though the research here notes but does not deeply explore it, there were also influences from black immigrants from the Caribbean and Africa. Together, this diverse community forged a new vision of what it meant to be black in America, one that embraced the past but looked boldly toward the future. While the Harlem Renaissance was shaped by many forces, it was ultimately the Great Migration that made it possible. The influx of people brought new ideas, fresh energy, and a hunger for change. The economic opportunities of the North, the relative freedom of urban life, and the determination to claim a place in American culture all converged in Harlem. Out of hardship and hope, a movement was born, one that would leave an indelible mark on art, music, literature, and the nation itself. Though much is known about the origins of the Harlem Renaissance, some aspects remain less fully explored. The important roles played by women, the specific contributions of Caribbean immigrants, and the influence of political organizations and the LGBTQ+ community are areas where further research could shed more light. Yet, even with these gaps, the essence of the movement is clear. The Harlem Renaissance emerged from the crucible of migration, struggle, and aspiration, transforming Harlem into a beacon of Black cultural achievement and pride. By the early 1920s, Harlem had become a vibrant center, alive with the hopes and dreams of just over 100,000 African Americans, the largest concentration anywhere in the world at the time. In these crowded streets, rented apartments, and smoky nightclubs, creativity seemed to pulse through the very air. The Harlem Renaissance, as it would come to be known, was not merely an artistic movement, it was a declaration of existence, a collective insistence on the value and depth of Black life in America. Within this exhilarating atmosphere, artists and writers used their talents to affirm cultural identity, challenge stereotypes, and reimagine what it meant to be Black in a rapidly changing country. The visual arts of the Harlem Renaissance were marked by innovation and self-discovery. Aaron Douglas, often called the father of African American art, stood at the forefront of this visual awakening. Douglas's work was instantly recognizable. He fused influences from African art, the fractured perspectives of Cubism, and the sleek lines of Art Deco, creating a style all his own. His paintings and murals featured silhouetted figures and bold geometric shapes, evoking both the distant past and a vision for the future. Douglas often drew upon imagery from ancient Egypt, a deliberate choice to connect the struggles and triumphs of contemporary African Americans to the grandeur and sophistication of ancient African civilizations. This was more than an aesthetic preference, it was a form of cultural reclamation, a visual argument that the roots of Black identity stretch back through centuries of achievement. One of Douglas's most celebrated contributions came in 1934, with the mural series Aspects of Negro Life, commissioned by the Federal Art Project for the New York Public Library. These murals unfolded along the library walls in sweeping narrative panels, tracing the journey from Africa through slavery, emancipation, and the ongoing search for equality. The figures in Douglas's murals, rendered in rhythmic, overlapping silhouettes, seemed to move in unison, an entire people linked by history and hope. His work did not shy away from the pain of the past, but it also radiated aspiration, capturing the spirit of a community that refused to be defined by oppression alone. Douglas's influence extended beyond his brush. He illustrated James Weldon Johnson's God's Trombones, and his art appeared in leading publications of the era, including Opportunity, The Crisis, and even Vanity Fair. As the founder of the art department at Fisk University and the first president of the Harlem Artists Guild, Douglas mentored a generation of artists who would carry the Renaissance's legacy forward. While other visual artists like Jacob Lawrence, Augusta Savage, Archibald Motley, and Romare Bearden made their own marks during this period, the available research focuses most closely on Douglas's pioneering role. If the visual arts provided the Harlem Renaissance with its iconic imagery, literature gave it a powerful voice. No figure embodies this more than Langston Hughes. Born in 1901, Hughes emerged in the early 1920s as a poet whose words seemed to sing with the rhythms of jazz and the blues. His first poem appeared in The Crisis in 1921, but it was his 1926 collection, The Weary Blues, that truly announced his arrival. Hughes's verse was direct, musical, and deeply rooted in the everyday experiences of Black Americans. He wrote about pride and pain, laughter and longing, embracing the full spectrum of Black life rather than limiting himself to portraits of respectability or elite achievement. Hughes believed passionately that Black artists should create without fear or shame. In his influential 1926 essay, The Negro Artist and the Racial Mountain, he challenged writers and painters to draw inspiration from their own communities and traditions. This call reverberated throughout Harlem's creative circles, emboldening artists to find beauty and meaning in their own voices. Hughes's poetry collections, From the Weary Blues to Fine Clothes to the Jew, broke new ground by refusing to turn away from the realities of working-class life, the pulse of city streets, and the enduring effects of racism. Zora Neale Hurston, another towering figure of the era, brought a different but equally vital sensibility to Harlem's literary scene. A writer, folklorist, and anthropologist, Hurston grew up in the South and never lost her fascination with its stories, dialects, and folkways. Throughout the 1920s, she published short stories that captured the humor, sorrow, and resilience of rural Black communities. Hurston's most celebrated novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God, would not appear until 1937, but her earlier work already foreshadowed her commitment to centering Black women's experiences and honoring the richness of oral tradition. Hurston's career was marked by both innovation and collaboration. She co-founded Howard University's newspaper, The Hilltop, established a School of Dramatic Arts at Bethune-Cookman College, and even worked with Hughes on the play M. Yulebone. Her anthropological research in Haiti and Jamaica informed her influential books, Mules and Men, Until My Horse, blending careful observation with storytelling to preserve traditions that might otherwise have been lost. Together, the achievements of Douglas, Hughes, and Hurston illustrate the major themes that defined the Harlem Renaissance. Their work explored the legacy of slavery, the ongoing battle against racism, and the urgent need for cultural affirmation. Through painting, poetry, and prose, they insisted on the dignity and complexity of Black life, challenging the country to rethink its assumptions and prejudices. Their art was not only a form of personal expression, but also a tool for social commentary, a way to confront injustice and imagine a different future. The research makes clear that the Harlem Renaissance left a profound mark on American culture, influencing later generations of Black artists and writers, and helping to lay the intellectual and creative groundwork for the civil rights movement. While the stories of other important artists, broader artistic techniques, and the precise reception of these works remain less explored in the existing scholarship, the enduring significance of this artistic flourishing is undeniable. In Harlem's crowded rooms and luminous canvases, on printed pages and recited verses, the Renaissance gave voice to the dreams and the demands of a people determined to shape their own destiny. On any given night in the 1920s, Harlem, the air vibrated with sound, a pulse that seemed to rise from the very sidewalks and spill into the city beyond. Jazz riffs, blues wails, and the syncopated clatter of piano keys echoed from behind club doors, each note a statement of presence and possibility. The Harlem Renaissance was in full swing, and nowhere was its creative energy more electrifying than in the music that poured from its streets and stages. This musical awakening was no accident. It was, in many ways, the soundtrack to a profound demographic shift. The Great Migration had brought over 1 million African Americans from the rural South to northern cities by 1919, and the pace only quickened in the years that followed. Of these, approximately 300,000 settled in Harlem by 1920, each individual carrying stories, traditions, and perhaps most enduringly, music rooted in the lived experiences of Black America. In Harlem, these sounds collided and fused, giving rise to new forms, jazz and blues. Both genres, distinctly American and deeply intertwined with African American experience, became the heartbeat of the neighborhood and the era. Jazz, especially, emerged as a force that would reshape the very idea of popular music. It was improvisational, dynamic, and innovative qualities that mirrored the transformative spirit of the Harlem Renaissance itself. Harlem became a magnet for musicians eager to experiment and invent. The neighborhood's clubs, dance halls, and theaters provided both stage and audience, nurturing talent in an environment alive with creative competition and camaraderie. At the center of this musical revolution stood Duke Ellington. Born in Washington, District of Columbia, Ellington moved to Harlem and, by the 1920s, was leading the house band at the Cotton Club. The Cotton Club was legendary, a glamorous, whites-only establishment that paradoxically depended on Black musicians for its allure. While segregation kept Black audiences out, the talent on stage dazzled visitors and shaped musical trends far beyond Harlem's borders. Ellington's sophisticated arrangements and bold compositions pushed jazz beyond its roots in dance halls and bars, elevating it to a respected art form. His music, blending complex harmonies with infectious rhythms, proved that jazz could be as nuanced and emotionally resonant as any classical symphony. Louis Armstrong, another titan of the era, brought a different kind of magic to Harlem stages. Originally from New Orleans, Armstrong's arrival in New York marked a turning point for jazz. His trumpet playing was revolutionary, marked by joyful improvisation and technical brilliance that set new standards for musicianship. Armstrong's charisma, his infectious smile, gravelly voice, and playful stage presence won over audiences, Black and white alike. If Ellington gave jazz its architectural elegance, Armstrong gave it its soul, showing how a single performer's creativity could transform a song into something wholly new each time it was played. But the Harlem Renaissance was not only about jazz. Blues, too, found an eager audience in Harlem's clubs and theaters. No voice carried the blues like that of Bessie Smith, known as the Empress of the Blues. Smith's powerful, emotionally charged singing spoke of hardship and heartbreak, but also of resilience and hope, themes that resonated deeply with both performers and listeners. Her popularity extended well beyond Harlem, bringing blues music to new audiences and helping to cement its place in the American musical landscape. The soundscape of Harlem was further enriched by a constellation of other musicians: Fats Waller's exuberant piano, Billie Holiday's haunting vocals, Chick Webb's driving drums, Jelly Roll Morton's pioneering compositions, and Willie the Lion Smith's keyboard wizardry all contributed to the era's vibrancy. While Ella Fitzgerald's star would rise slightly after the Renaissance's peak, her roots in the Harlem scene connect her indelibly to its legacy. The music of the Harlem Renaissance was more than entertainment. It was a declaration of identity and a challenge to the racial stereotypes that dominated American society. By showcasing black artistry at the highest levels, musicians undermined the narrow, often demeaning caricatures that had long prevailed in mainstream culture. On stage, they claimed the right to define themselves and, in doing so, inspired pride and confidence in black audiences. Yet the era was not without contradiction. While venues like the Cotton Club gave black artists a platform, they also underscored the realities of segregation and economic inequality. Black musicians often played to all-white audiences, and opportunities for financial security were limited by racism and exploitation. Despite these barriers, the music endured, transcending the limitations placed upon its creators. The impact of Harlem's sound stretched far beyond its neighborhood boundaries. Jazz and blues became national obsessions, influencing musical styles across the country and even abroad. The innovations of Ellington, Armstrong, Smith, and their peers laid the groundwork for later genres, including rhythm and blues and rock and roll, and their influence is often cited as foundational for later developments such as hip-hop. Their artistry reshaped the cultural landscape, leaving a legacy that continues to resonate. Listeners today may find it difficult to imagine the thrill of those first nights when jazz and blues were new, when improvisation felt like a revolution, and when a Harlem stage could launch a musician to national fame. But the spirit of the Harlem Renaissance lives on in every note of music that dares to innovate, every performance that claims space for new voices, and every artist who transforms struggle into beauty. In the sound of Harlem, the story of a people and a nation finding its voice is heard clear, undeniable, and enduring. The Harlem Renaissance, rooted in the energy and optimism of the 1920s. Harlem casts a shadow that stretches far beyond its original moment. Its legacy is deeply woven into the fabric of American culture, influencing not only the generations that followed, but also the very way the nation thinks about art, race, and identity. The echoes of this vibrant movement, born in the streets and salons of Harlem, continue to shape the narrative of Black creativity and American expression. At the heart of the Harlem Renaissance's lasting influence is its foundational role in redefining what it meant to be African American, both in art and in life. Before the Renaissance, African American identity was often confined by rigid stereotypes and the enduring legacy of slavery. Through literature, music, and visual art, the movement's artists and thinkers challenged these limitations, insisting on a fuller, richer, and more complex vision of Black life. They drew openly from the pain of the past, the shadow of slavery, and the struggles of the Great Migration, but also from the vitality of the present and the promise of the future. This reimagining of identity did not remain confined to Harlem. It reverberated across the country and, in time, the world, offering a new model of Black consciousness that would inspire artists and activists for decades to come. One of the most significant ways the Harlem Renaissance shaped American culture was by laying the groundwork for the powerful social movements that followed. The Renaissance's embrace of Black pride, community, and self-expression provided the intellectual and artistic foundation for both the civil rights movement and the Black arts movement that emerged in the mid-20th century. The belief that art could be a vehicle for change, that a poem, a jazz song, or a mural might shape public opinion or fuel a march for justice, became a central tenet for later generations. The spirit of questioning and resistance that characterized Harlem's creative scene in the 1920s found new life in the activism of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, as leaders and artists alike turned to the Renaissance for inspiration and precedent. The artistic legacy of the Harlem Renaissance is equally profound and visible. Its influence can be traced through the evolution of American music, from the jazz and blues that once filled Harlem's nightclubs to the birth of rock and roll and, later, hip-hop. Pioneers like Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, and Bessie Smith did not simply entertain. They transformed the possibilities of American music, introducing improvisation, syncopation, and a distinctly Black perspective to the national soundscape. These innovations laid the groundwork for countless genres that followed, and their impact is still felt in the rhythms and melodies that animate contemporary American music. Likewise, the Renaissance's visual artists, including figures such as Aaron Douglas, helped establish a visual vocabulary that remains central to African American art and modern graphic design. The written word, too, bears the indelible mark of the Harlem Renaissance. Writers like Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and Claude McKay opened new doors for African American literature, demonstrating that Black voices could command national attention and speak to universal themes. Their work continues to inspire, not only as literary achievements, but as touchstones for those seeking to explore questions of race, identity, and belonging. The themes that animated their writing, the legacy of slavery, the importance of community, the search for dignity and self-definition, remain central to African American literature today. Beyond individual artists and genres, the Harlem Renaissance left a legacy of institutions that nurtured Black creativity across the United States. The Harlem Community Art Center, established in 1937, stands as a testament to the movement's commitment to fostering artistic talent and building supportive networks. This institution, and others inspired by it, created spaces where Black artists could develop their craft, learn from one another, and share their work with wider audiences. Such centers helped ensure that the creative spirit of the Renaissance would not be extinguished with the passing of its first generation, but would continue to grow and evolve. Celebration of the Harlem Renaissance has not faded with time. Its centennial was marked by the Harlem Renaissance 100, a multi-year initiative that sought to honor the movement's achievements, encourage new generations of artists, and promote cultural tourism in Harlem. Through exhibitions, performances, and educational programs, the legacy of the Renaissance is kept alive, reminding Americans and the world of the power of creativity in the face of adversity. Yet, for all its impact, there are aspects of the Harlem Renaissance's legacy that remain less fully explored. While historians agree on its foundational influence, the role of women and LGBTQ+ figures, the movement's international reach, and its economic consequences are areas where more research and recognition are needed. Similarly, while it is clear that the Renaissance helped pave the way for the civil rights movement, the specifics of how particular leaders or organizations drew upon its ideas await deeper study. Nonetheless, the central achievement of the Harlem Renaissance endures. It transformed how America sees itself. By asserting the value and complexity of Black life through music, poetry, painting, and more, the movement challenged a nation to broaden its imagination. Its themes of resilience, pride, and creative defiance continue to resonate, inspiring artists and activists to this day and ensuring that the story of Harlem in the 1920s is not merely a chapter in history, but an ongoing source of hope and possibility.